All right, 10 o'clock on the dot. Let's get started here today. Today's topic for the long coffee break, we're just going to do a quick A2L update. And your presenters are myself, Madeline Landis. I'm a sales engineer at Long. I've been here for just over 2 years now. Previous to that, I worked as a sales engineer in San Francisco at another Daikin rep. So happy to be back in Colorado. And then with me, I have Mark Jelinski.
Hello, Mark Jelinski. I've been a consulting engineer for like ever and joined Long about 4 months ago, so 5 months ago. So I'm here to support the sales engineers and provide answers to things that we're going to talk about here.
All right, we have a lot of stuff to go over in a short amount of time. So just going to start quickly with the current state of refrigerant and HVAC with the new A2Ls. And then talk quickly about some of the recent application challenges that we've experienced here at Long. And then Mark is going to do a really high-level code update. And then we're going to share some of the solutions that we've been working through now. And then just really making sure that everyone understands high level of the equipment IOMs. Something I definitely want to point out before we even get started is that this presentation could be easily 3 hours. It's Mark and I's goal to just briefly introduce all the topics, but we understand that there may be questions or that we won't have the opportunity to deep dive on a lot of the topics. So if you have any additional questions afterward, definitely reach out to your Long sales engineer, Mark or myself. Right, so where are we right now? As many of you are aware, as of January 1st of this year, all new HVAC equipment was required to use refrigerants with a GDP of 700 or less. In 2025, larger equipment such as chillers and package units already went through this transition. Things like centrifugal chillers and things with screw compressors had a little bit of an easier time because the replacement low GWP refrigerant was still an A1, meaning that it was low toxicity and still had a low flame propagation risk. As many of you are aware, scroll chillers and things with scroll compressors had it much more challenging because the replacement for R410A was a new type of refrigerant that had a category as of its own because it does have an increased flammability. So some application challenges that we have experienced during both design and installation with these new refrigerants and the slight risk of flame propagation is that there's additional measures that must be taken during VRV design, during indoor air handling unit with a split DX condenser design, and even with indoor water-cooled chillers, there's things that you just need to pay attention to that previously you didn't. You want to take careful consideration to the installation location. You want to make sure that the refrigerant charges in those spaces is going to be below a certain level. So there's just some challenges that we've seen that all of you, I'm sure, are experiencing with retrofits and new designs. I'm going to turn it over to Mark now, and he's going to do just a high level on some code review and some confusion that we've experienced, and I'm sure some of you have experienced too.
Yeah, we've done a pretty good job as an industry talking about some of the transitions when it comes to ASHRAE 15. I'm not going to go over all of that right now. What I will talk about is the confusion that's out there because there are, the actual code adopted by jurisdictions involves the International Mechanical Code. And the International Mechanical Code prior to the 2024 at the best you could say is doesn't address A2Ls in most HVAC DX type applications. And I would make the argument that it really doesn't even allow it in most applications. So that's why we've been talking ASHRAE. However, the jurisdictions they're officially on the IMC, right? Even the 2024 IMC is kind of problematic, particularly for package DX VRV splits. It starts off with just only in half the allowable charge per cubic foot. It's based on 25% of the LFL rather than 50% of the LFL for listed equipment. There's no provisions at all for reducing releasable refrigerant charge, such as safety shutoff valves. There's no, just ventilation of the space option other than a full mechanical room. It's kind of impractical and really, I'd say, unsafe volume calculations that allow you to use some loopholes that, okay, it was one thing to do with an A1 refrigerant, but now that we're talking semi-flammables, we really shouldn't use those loopholes that forget about the actual heavy, the weight of the refrigerant. Oh, and the ventilated pipe shaft. I'm sorry, that last one right there is a biggie in the IMC. Go on, I'm sorry. Next one. And the other thing that both codes trigger is a hellacious amount of ventilation air if a refrigeration machinery room is triggered. Now, there's an option to go with a C1D2, essentially quote unquote explosion proof construction in the room, but that's not going to happen. So you really, really want to avoid refrigeration machinery room. Even replacing existing machinery room, the old A1 ventilation rate is going to be a fraction of what you're going to need for a comparable A2L refrigerant. So ASHRAE 15, again, one thing I wanted to point out specifically about that, maybe you've been hearing about this coming. Yes, the addendum B is now officially out, which totally gets rid of both the trigger for a fire resistive rated shaft in the first place, and then having to ventilate that shaft. So this is a huge reason why we want to use ASHRAE 15. My computer just went down. I'm going to scoot over here. That's why we did that. So yes, we recommend using ASHRAE 15 versus IMC. Go to your authority having jurisdiction, talk with them. Many of them have already set up policies. Denver, in particular, completely adopted ASHRAE 15 for A2L refrigerants. So that's what I got to say. Talk to us about some more details if you need to. Oh, I do have one more slide here. UL, actually, a couple of big points on this is that regardless of the code we're under, all equipment is required to be rated and listed to this UL standard, and not necessarily water cooled chillers, but anything that's going to have a refrigerant coil in the airstream, DX. And one of the things that talks about is yeah, go ahead, Mansby, is, some of the practicalities involved. These are all going to be, in order to follow the UL instructions, you still will need to provide for refrigerant detection and certain volume or actually space area requirements above and beyond what's in UL. Above and beyond ASHRAE. You may have avoided a refrigeration machinery room, but you still need a certain amount of area to install this equipment in. There's specific listings for partial units. We certainly know about condensed units. You buy any condensing unit you're going to buy commercially will be listed to this standard now. But it's the evaporator side that is a little bit more confusing. And I'm just going to leave it at that for now. We got a few solutions we can talk about, but this all should be documented in the IOM manuals, the operations, the installation manuals, and therefore you really need to be reading up on these along with the product selections we're getting you.
So then we can kind of move on into some of those solutions. Like Mark mentioned, it's our recommendation to really focus on ASHRAE 15 in lieu of IMC to avoid having to use those ventilative resistive piping shafts in VRV designs. First and foremost, another way to make sure that the product's going to meet the new code is that you're selecting that UL listed equipment with the ETRS labels. ETRS stands for Equipment Technical Reference Standard, and it's a label that indicates that the unit has been evaluated specifically for flammable refrigerants, and that it includes some required risk safety mitigation features. I think an interesting risk mitigation feature that's included in our VRV solution is the safety shutoff valves. You can see it in the top diagram here. It's the little orange squares or red squares that are on the individual branches. What this allows you to do is shut off those valves and limit the amount of refrigerant that goes to each branch, so that if there is a leak, that there's a limited amount of releasable refrigerant that would go into those smaller spaces. When you are doing your calculations and your designs at the beginning, it's important to do the EDVC calculations for each of the rooms that's associated with those valves. And in the worst case scenario, if you are above that RCL limit for one of the small spaces, then you can look at using a UL listed ventilated enclosure for our branch selector boxes. Again, I think just this VRV slide could probably be an entire hour-long solution in presentation. So I just want to point out that this is the very, very high level, and that if you have any other questions, definitely reach out to our long VRV team. They're experts in this, and they can really help you with design and installation moving forward. Some other application challenges that we've experienced is using indoor water-cooled chillers and heat pumps. Very similar to VRV applications, the first step is understanding the volume of the mechanical room and understanding how much refrigerant can be used before it's considered a machine room. An easy way to assure that you're within these limits, or an easier way, is to use modular chillers because they have smaller refrigerants per module. The kind of interesting and cool thing is that Multistack actually just released a new technology, and it's called their microcharge module. And with this design, they have modules that have as low as 0.6 pounds of refrigerant per ton. So a really cool way to be able to fit modules into those spaces. And I think probably the most prevalent issue that we've experienced here at Long, or at least I have, is when you're using split DX retrofits or new installations. I think the first step is to confirm that the equipment is UL listed. Like Mark mentioned, typically the DX condensing units aren't the problem, but where you want to pay close attention is when you're selecting UL listed air handling units with those integral A2L refrigerant detection systems and coils. Ultimately, I think our goal is to meet the intent of the requirements where UL documentation is kind of scarce right now. There's not a whole bunch of information on split evaporator coils. And I think that a great way to protect the building occupants and to meet the intent of the code is to use like field engineered solutions for refrigerant leak mitigations. I have a couple slides here that show like an oxygenate unit that can be matched to an indoor Daikin air handling unit. Another great option is to use our Daikin VRV integration kit. And then another point would be to using an air source heat pump with an integral pump and bumper take package that you can see here as well. It's high level again, so please definitely reach out with questions. And Mark's gonna just quickly touch on
really
some IOMs.
Yeah, please do ask for the IOMs. There's all sorts of interesting requirements you'll find in there, some scare notes perhaps, but you need to be aware of this as you're designing and laying stuff out.
All right, and with 1 minute to spare, we are on to probably the most exciting part. Today's coffee breaks prizes is number one, a $100 Shell gas gift card, a Yeti Rambler half-gallon jug, or most exciting, a tortilla blanket. I hope everyone has a great day, and definitely reach out if you have more questions.